Ambitious beginnings. Emily Carter stood by the window of her sleek, sunlit corner office in downtown Boston, feeling a buzz of anticipation pulsing through her veins. The city shimmered beneath her feet, a living testament to opportunity and to everything she had fought for. Emily was only 32, but in the competitive world of pharmaceuticals, she'd already made a name for herself. Founding Biotera Solutions straight out of Harvard Business School 3 years ago, Emily was the industry's rising star, a disruptor known for both her scientific acumen and her business intuition. The story of Biotera's ascent was woven from countless late nights and risk-laden decisions. Emily had bootstrapped the company, convinced a handful of skeptical investors to buy into her vision, and assembled a team of bright young minds as passionate as she was. Their breakthrough, a proprietary drug delivery technology poised to revolutionize the way cancer medication was administered. Early trials had shown extraordinary promise, and the industry buzzed with rumors of Biotera's potential to outpace older, more powerful corporations. At the heart of Emily's journey stood Michael Reed, her COO and confidant since college. Michael was her sounding board and anchor, given to dry wit and sharp analysis that balanced Emily's relentless energy. Their camaraderie was legendary among staff. They finished each other's sentences and celebrated every milestone together, from closing their first big deal to securing FDA clearance for clinical trials. Despite whispers in the industry about the perils a young woman might face in a male-dominated field, Emily felt secure, knowing Michael had her back. But the pharmaceutical world was a battlefield. Despite Biotera's youth, powerful opponents circled like sharks. Sterling Pharma, a storied titan led by the calculating Richard Dawson, had recently lost market share to Emily's fast-growing company. The industry grapevine whispered of Sterling's aggressive tactics, hostile acquisitions, patent lawsuits, and cutthroat business maneuvers designed to squash competition before it gained ground. Yet Emily had managed to maneuver through the chaos, securing landmark deals with hospitals and venture capitalists. Inside Biotera, the atmosphere was electric, part idealistic, part war room. Emily inspired her team not only with vision, but vulnerability. She spoke candidly about the stakes and the challenges they all faced, fostering trust and camaraderie. Employees worked late into the night, motivated by the belief that their work could save lives. Emily's leadership style was hands-on and empathetic. She knew every team member's name, their dreams, and even their favorite brand of coffee. Still, there were pressures Emily rarely voiced aloud. Investors expected near miraculous growth. Rivals watched closely for mistakes. Her family worried about the toll it all took. Emily reassured them, but an undercurrent of tension persisted. Would her ambition and ideals hold steady against a business world indifferent to either? As the chapter closes, Emily gazes out at the city with a blend of exhaustion and hope. The company is on the verge of something transformative. Unbeknownst to her, storm clouds are gathering. In these bright early days, she only sees a future she's determined to claim, unaware of just how formidable her enemies and how deeply betrayal can cut. The first trap. The year was off to a promising start at Biotera Solutions. Contracts were pouring in, and Emily Carter's face had graced the cover of more than one business magazine. Yet beneath the hum of productivity, something felt off. A subtle shift Emily couldn't quite put her finger on. Inside her glass-walled office, a sense of vigilance now rode alongside her usual optimism. It started with a phone call late on a Thursday. Biotera had been cut from a high-profile supply agreement with Chandler Medical, a prominent Midwest hospital network. The representative's tone was clipped and apologetic, citing sudden regulatory concerns and internal risk reviews. Emily's heart sank. Chandler was supposed to be a cornerstone of Biotera's upcoming growth, a contract months in negotiation, and, so she'd believed, sealed with trust. Within a week, a second blow landed. A formal complaint was filed against Biotera's patent for their flagship drug delivery device. Allegedly, it infringed on technology from a much older, much larger competitor. The industry's rumor mill roared to life, pundits speculating about lawsuits and humility for the upstart. Emily gathered her leadership team for an emergency meeting. Michael Reed and the other executives, tense, as they dissected the news. "What's more likely?" Michael asked, fixing Emily with a steady look. "A clerical mistake at the patent office? Or someone trying to box us in?" Emily weighed his words, feeling a mixture of anxiety and resolve. She trusted Michael's judgment, always sharper in storms than in calm seas. For years, they'd weathered obstacles together, but the string of bad luck felt too orchestrated to be coincidence. Her mind looped through the possibilities: sabotage, corporate espionage, even leaks from inside her own ranks. The team launched a barrage of responses, hastily assembled legal teams, ramped up PR outreach, late-night calls with investors seeking reassurance. Employees noticed senior staff huddling in glass-walled offices, their faces drawn. Emily kept a brave front, walking the corridors with calm purpose. But inside, her doubts mounted. Was someone feeding their competitors information? Who else would benefit from Biotera's sudden misfortune? Social media only made things worse. Anonymous accounts, some with suspiciously similar phrasing, began smearing Biotera's reputation, accusing the company of cutting corners, even endangering patients. Competitors seemed to pounce on every stumble, issuing press releases touting their own integrity and proven track records. Through it all, Emily continued to trust Michael. He had been her confidant since their Harvard days. And despite the murmurs of suspicion, even among some of the staff, she couldn't bring herself to doubt him. Together, they worked late into the night, analyzing internal communications, reviewing security protocols, and urging their team to stay focused. Yet cracks were beginning to show. One trusted researcher handed in her notice, pale and harried, muttering something about career risks too great to ignore. Investors grew restless, not as quick with their promises of support. The sense of invulnerability Emily had once felt as Biotera soared now evaporated, replaced by an uneasy vigilance. As she stood in the laboratory, watching the flicker of fluorescent lights on stainless steel benches, Emily's mind raced. How far would her competitors go to ensure her fall? And more unsettling still, could she truly say with certainty who was on her side and who was playing a double game? By the chapter's close, Emily resolves to fight back. The world she thought she'd mastered is now full of shadows, and behind every shadow might lurk the next trap. For the first time since Biotera's beginning, Emily realizes that ambition is not enough. Survival may demand an entirely new set of rules. Betrayalist Emily Carter rarely struggled to sleep, but in recent weeks, rest had become elusive. Phone calls from worried investors, urgent meetings with her legal team, and a steady drip of staff resignations kept her mind spinning long after the rest of Boston had gone quiet. She buried her anxiety in work, convinced that sheer willpower could hold Biotera together through the mounting chaos. What she refused to consider, that the heart of the crisis might be dangerously close, was about to confront her in the harshest way possible. The revelation came on a rainy Wednesday. Emily was alone, sifting through yet another batch of legal correspondence, when Anna Kim, her head of IT, appeared in her doorway. Anna's face was drawn, her hands trembling slightly as she held out a printed report. "You should see this," Anna said softly. The report detailed a series of data breaches over the previous months, files accessed after hours, confidential emails forwarded from company accounts, proprietary research pulled from secure servers. But what made Emily's blood run cold was the pattern. Each breach tied directly to Michael Reed's login credentials. At first, disbelief overwhelmed her. Michael, her closest ally, the man whose loyalty she'd never questioned. Desperation drove her to hope for another explanation. A stolen password, a technical glitch, a skillful impersonation. But Anna, thorough as ever, was already one step ahead. Not only had the IT team traced the access trails, but they had also uncovered encrypted communications between Michael and an outside email address, registered to an executive at Sterling Pharma, Richard Dawson's company. Emily's hands shook as she read the transcripts. Trade secrets, future product plans, and regulatory strategies, all carefully compiled and sent to Biotera's biggest rival. In those moments, reality crashed down. Michael had been leaking information for months, orchestrating the very patterns of sabotage and misfortune that threatened to destroy everything Emily had built. Confronting Michael felt like entering the eye of a storm. She summoned him into her office late that afternoon. Michael walked in as if nothing was amiss, offering a tired smile. Emily cut straight to the point, sliding the evidence across her desk. There was no grand denial, only a sigh and the faintest flicker of remorse. Michael admitted everything. "It wasn't supposed to go this far, Em," he muttered. "Richard made promises, funding, protection. I thought I could control it, that you'd never get hurt." Emily was too stunned for anger. She saw, all at once, the cracks she'd ignored. His late-night calls, hesitant evasions, the chill in their friendship as the crisis had deepened. She felt the betrayal in her bones, a physical ache worse than any corporate setback. News spread fast throughout Biotera's already fragile ranks. For those employees who hadn't yet resigned, the sense of safety evaporated overnight. Panic set in as reporters began circling, fed tips about a scandal at a biotech startup. Rival firms released statements piling on, and Biotera's remaining investors withdrew funds in droves. Outside the company, the media pounced. Headlines splashed across financial news. For Emily, the days became a blur of damage control and private anguish. Even as the company's executive board met to review their options, she fielded calls from attorneys, regulators, and journalists demanding answers. Alone, she replayed every moment of trust she had given Michael, wondering how she had been so blind. Yet beneath the emotional wreckage, a new resolve began to form. If she had been betrayed by her most trusted ally, she reasoned, she could no longer rely on anyone but herself. The rules had changed, and so would she. The only way forward, she realized as dawn broke after another sleepless night, was not just to survive, but to reclaim her story and expose the rot at the industry's core. As the chapter closed, Emily stood resolute amid the ruins, her pain blurring into determination. The world now saw her as a victim, abandoned, defeated. But Emily Carter, for the first time, was ready to fight on her own terms. On the brink of collapse, Emily Carter looked around what remained of Biotera Solutions, her world reduced to a skeleton crew and a flickering sense of hope. No part of the modern office in downtown Boston seemed untouched by the fallout, where there had once been laughter and hurried footsteps in the halls. Now, Uneasy silence echoed. The faces she passed in the corridor seemed older, eyes sunken with exhaustion and dread. Desks once humming with purposeful chatter now stood abandoned, half-packed boxes, a reminder of app developers, chemists, and marketers who had already turned in their badges. Just days after Michael's betrayal hit the press, the exodus began. Some employees left out of fear, others out of sorrow, and many simply couldn't weather the uncertainty. Peter, the head of regulatory affairs and a steady presence through countless FDA briefings, sent a single-sentence resignation from his personal email. "I simply can't do this anymore." Mara, who had started as an intern before working her way up to project manager, left her goodbye sticky note on Emily's monitor. The ink smudged, perhaps by tears. Every departure felt like a physical blow, each leaving a new void in the fragile structure Emily had built. Investors had been next. In the span of 72 hours, nearly half of Biotera's backers withdrew support. Emily spent day and night trying to assuage their doubts, firing off updates and hosting emergency webinars. None of it was enough. Venture capitalists, once eager for a piece of Biotera's projected billions, now cited fiduciary duty and essential risk management as they walked away. The dream of revolutionizing cancer drug delivery became a cautionary tale in boardrooms across Boston and Silicon Valley. Within a week, Emily learned that both regional offices would have to shut down. The company's cash burn far outpaced their remaining capital. She gathered the remaining executives, most now holding double or triple roles, to dissect which operations could be salvaged and which must be let go. It was not the kind of strategic meeting Emily relished. Instead of planning for expansion, they mapped out layoffs and payments owed, uncertain about even their own job security. The practical burden was crushing enough, but it was the intangible loss that haunted Emily most. The camaraderie, the sense of higher purpose, and the faith her people had once placed in her leadership, gone in an instant. In quiet moments, she questioned every decision leading up to this crisis. Had she missed the signs of Michael's betrayal because she hadn't wanted to see them? Was there something about her leadership, her idealism, perhaps, or her tenacity that had pushed others to desperation? Each question gnawed at the edge of her confidence, threatening to unravel the resolve she'd so carefully cultivated. The media, relentless and unsparing, circled above like vultures. Every day brought new headlines dissecting Biotera's meltdown. Anonymous sources, some clearly former employees, leaked confidential memos and emails. On television and financial podcasts, industry analysts discussed Biotera as a textbook example of startup fragility, dwelling on Emily's youth, gender, and supposed naivete as a leader. A cautionary tale, sneered one commentator, without ever mentioning the betrayal and sabotage that truly lay at the company's core. Emily tried to shield what remained of her team from the scrutiny, encouraging them to mute notifications, to avoid online comment sections, to focus on tasks left undone. But she saw the toll it took. The anxiety, snap tempers, and sudden illnesses. Staff meetings shrank in size and scope. Fewer hands were raised in brainstorming sessions. And each morning, the office felt emptier than the last. As layoffs began in earnest, Emily insisted on meeting every affected employee in person, refusing to issue form letters or impersonal HR emails. She wanted them to see her face, to hear her apology, and if nothing else, to thank them for their work and courage. Some accepted her words with sad nods or silent tears. Others lashed out, seeking answers and comfort Emily was not always able to give. "We believed in you," someone whispered on their way out. The ache of those words stayed with her long after. Her personal life, once a source of stability, now seemed as volatile as the company's balance sheet. Emily found herself sleeping in the office more often than not, rising before dawn to confront the mountain of crisis-related emails and press inquiries. Her parents left concerned voicemails, her mother suggesting she move home for a while, her father wondering aloud if all the sacrifice had been worth it. Old friends reached out, their support sometimes landing as reminders of what she'd lost. In spare, private moments, Emily allowed herself to grieve. She cried, not just for her own losses, but for her team, for the patients whose lives Biotera's technology might have changed, for the humiliating public spectacle she could not escape. When the tears finally subsided, she would stare out the window at the city, gathering herself for another day of triage and negotiation. Yet, woven through the devastation was a stubborn thread of resolve. Emily understood that to crumble now was to let Michael and Richard Dawson's brand of transgression truly win. Every pang of humiliation and despair, every bit of whispered gossip and cynical headline became the raw material of her resilience. She began to catalog the damage, not just as a victim, but as an investigator. Emily started to chart the connections between the external attacks, social media smears, regulatory red flags, sudden contract withdrawals, and the evidence from Anna's IT probe. She kept a journal, recording what had happened, when, and to whom. Step by step, the chaos began to take on a grim kind of order. The pattern was undeniable, the design cruder and more ruthless than even she had dared to imagine. In these darkest weeks, a small group of loyalists remained by her side. Anna Kim doubled her efforts, sealing vulnerabilities in the company's servers while quietly tracking the digital back channels from which so much sabotage had originated. Becky, a young legal associate, worked around the clock compiling evidence and drafting affidavits, convinced, as Emily was becoming convinced, that legal retribution was still possible. Among the brilliant research staff, 2 scientists elected to stay, driven by a sense of justice and unfinished business, rather than any promise of a paycheck. Together, they carved out a war room amid the cavernous, half-abandoned headquarters. Coffee cups and empty pizza boxes became the currency of their long nights. In whispered tones, they discussed what remained, what could still be saved, and what might finally reveal the rot that had devoured Biotera from within. As the 4th week drew to a close, Emily felt herself hardening. Compassion remained, but doubt had been replaced with clarity. She would not placate the press. She would not explain herself to her betrayers. If Biotera was to expire, it would do so fighting, and Emily understood now that the rules of business, as she'd once learned them, no longer applied. Standing at the edge of her ruined empire, Emily Carter saw 2 roads ahead. One led to resignation and oblivion. The other, steeper and far lonelier, offered the chance, not just for survival, but for a reckoning. With little left to lose, Emily pledged herself to the second path. Collecting the last of her files, she shut the door to Biotera's boardroom, knowing she would not return again until she had uncovered every last secret. Her mind, sharpened by adversity, her heart shielded by grief, turned determination. Emily prepared for the fight of her life. And in that lonely stillness, a new idea began to flicker, one that would one day ignite a revolution. Rebirth, the final echoes of Biotera's collapse, still haunted Emily Carter as she stepped into the frosty Boston air before dawn. The office she once called a second home now stood as a hollow shell in her memory, a mausoleum to trust broken, dreams mangled, and lives disrupted. Yet somewhere, beneath her exhaustion and grief, the pulse of resolve was growing stronger. For 2 weeks, Emily retreated from the public eye. Reporters kept calling. Former colleagues sent messages of sympathy or silent recrimination, and her parents urged her to pause and heal. But healing, she realized, meant more than simply licking wounds. It meant discovering what, if anything, she could salvage from the wreck of Biotera's ambition. She rented a modest co-working space in Cambridge, far from the shimmering towers of the financial district, intentionally choosing solitude over spectacle. Emily furnished her new space herself. Secondhand desks, a whiteboard crowded with ideas, a cheap coffee maker that sputtered and steamed. Here, there were no glass walls or panoramic city views. There was only the grit that had once made her a founder and would now have to make her a survivor. In the first days, Emily worked alone. She scoured stacks of documents rescued from her old office, scanned emails, compared timestamps, and mapped out the chronology of sabotage. Each detail, painful as it was, offered a chance at understanding and, maybe, a way forward. But she understood that if she wanted to expose her industry's darkest secrets, she couldn't do it alone. Anna Kim was the first to join her. The former head of IT arrived at the Cambridge office one bitterly cold morning, her hair in a messy bun, arms laden with hard drives and legal pads. "I can't sleep, knowing they think they won," Anna declared, eyes fierce. She set up a makeshift cyber lab in the corner, her screens flashing lines of code as she pored over digital forensic trails, too tangled for any outsider to crack. Soon after, Becky Levine showed up, carrying a tote bag heavy with law books and a burning sense of purpose. Her official title had been Legal Associate at Biotera. But Becky was more than just a lawyer. She had been a friend, the first to believe in Emily's vision of ethical science. "They left us the shoddiest office in Boston," she joked wryly, "which means no one will bother us as we build the case of the century." By week's end, the loyal core was rebuilt. Dr. Priya Desai, a gentle but brilliant cancer biologist, and Nolan Cruz, data scientist and once the company's youngest hire, joined their ad hoc team. With little thought to salaries or job titles, they sat shoulder to shoulder at folding tables late into the night, united not by obligation, but by anger and unfinished business. Emily's first mission was clear: prove that Biotera, and now she herself, had been victims of a coordinated attack rooted deep within the pharmaceutical industry. The group patiently traced every move their adversaries had made. Anna followed digital breadcrumbs through encrypted email servers and external IP addresses, uncovering records of financial transfers likely meant to buy silence. Becky annotated timeline after timeline, assembling evidence admissible in court. Dr. Desai reached out to other researchers in the field, quietly gathering testimony about threats and blackmail from rivals. Nolan built data models, generating clear patterns that pointed to the system, not just individuals, being rotten. Emily also began compiling her own testimony. She relived her conversations with Michael Reed, his subtle evasions, midnight calls, the way he'd changed in those last months, and recorded them for what they revealed about manipulation and corporate betrayal. Sometimes, when she wrote, her hands trembled with anger and shame, but the documentation helped transform her pain into purpose. As the evidence mounted, Emily realized that the darkness she faced was larger than Biotera's tragedy. She began making discreet contact with others who had crossed paths with Sterling Pharma and its CEO, Richard Dawson. One was a physician turned researcher, hounded from her lab after refusing to falsify clinical trial data. Another, a small startup founder whose patent had shockingly vanished from government databases. Each conversation revealed new layers of intimidation, greed, and collusion, all benefiting the same handful of powerful men. Meanwhile, the outside world presumed Emily had disappeared for good. She ignored the clickbait headlines and talk show segments, dismissing her as just another failed founder. Instead, she filled her days and nights with purpose. She ran miles along the Charles River at dawn, then returned to the office to tackle her lists. Evidence to compile, interviews to record, connections to follow up, some days dragged with discouragement. Leads went nowhere. Allies doubted her, and the ache of betrayal sometimes threatened to choke her. But every time she contemplated quitting, Emily remembered the colleagues she had lost, the patients who had once pinned their hopes on Biotera's medical promises, and the burning need for accountability. Her rebirth was not a moment, but a process of stripping away illusion, of confronting her flaws and fears, and of recommitting to a higher truth than market share or reputation. In team meetings, she was honest, admitting her doubts even as she inspired the others to keep going. "If we fail," she said one night, "we fail honestly. But if we win, if we so much as show them for what they are, we make it harder for anyone else to do this again." It wasn't long before Emily's efforts began attracting the attention of outside allies. Investigative journalist Laura Tran, known for exposing healthcare fraud, requested a meeting. Emily and Becky met her at a dingy diner, sliding across a manila folder filled with carefully selected documents and timelines. Laura listened intently, scribbling notes.
Hello.
"This is bigger than a single company," she said grimly. "If you can give me sources, I can bring this public. But you'll need to be ready for war." The prospect of going public terrified Emily and her team, but it also solidified their sense of mission. The plan crystallized: collect incontrovertible proof, connect with other victims, and launch a coordinated campaign. Emily realized that taking down someone as entrenched and vicious as Richard Dawson would mean exposing herself to enormous risk, professional, legal, maybe even personal. But this time, the fear didn't paralyze her. She had already lost everything except her sense of what was right. Nights in the Cambridge office were long and unglamorous. Some evenings, Anna napped with her head on her keyboard, while Priya soothed nerves with homemade chai. Becky drafted affidavits and prepared legal strategies. Sometimes, when everyone else had gone home, Emily stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker in the hazy darkness. She knew the forces arrayed against her were formidable, but she also knew this. For the first time since her dream had been shattered, she felt alive, reborn, not as the figurehead of a fallen startup, but as a woman with new purpose. By chapter's end, Emily had what she needed to begin the next phase: evidence, allies, and above all, a battle plan forged in hardship and hope. Biotera might have been destroyed, but the fire that drove it was very much alive within her. And this time, she would not fight by the old rules. Digging into secrets, the newfound momentum in Emily Carter's life brought its own strain. As her core team worked late into another chilly Cambridge night, she acknowledged the simple truth. The web of sabotage and corruption targeting Biotera had been woven with ruthless calculation. Untangling it would require not just tenacity, but daring strategies and a willingness to confront dangerous truths. Emily's first priority was hiring a private investigator. She wanted an outsider, someone with no ties to the pharmaceutical world, immune to industry pressures and payoffs. A trusted friend of Becky's, connected them to Javier Torres, a former FBI cybercrimes agent known for his doggedness and discretion. When Javier arrived for an interview, his calm confidence in the faint New York accent put Emily immediately at ease. "We're not after just a paper trail," she explained, detailing what little they knew about leaks, financial shenanigans, and backroom threats. "We need connections, proof that what happened to Biotera isn't just misfortune, but orchestrated from higher up." Javier listened closely, nodding as Anna Kim outlined the digital evidence they'd already assembled. "You'll need corroboration from more than computers," he finally said. "You want hard evidence, witnesses, motives, the works. It'll be a war of information, not just numbers." True to his word, Javier began digging, cross-referencing names, patents, wire transfers, and patterns of coincidental firings across rival firms. Through encrypted channels, he traced possible shell corporations routed through offshore accounts, money leaving Sterling Pharma at odd intervals, reappearing in the hands of consultants or lobbying groups connected to recent regulatory actions against Biotera. Patiently, he built a visual map of relationships, each arrow and name deepening the sense of conspiracy. Emily, never one for idleness, took a different track. She reached out to founders and scientists whose companies, over recent years, had crumbled under similarly suspicious circumstances. Her calls were often met with suspicion at first. Many had learned to distrust anyone in the industry, fearing their words would be twisted or reported back to competitors. "Your story is too familiar to ignore," said Dr. Samantha Liu, once the CEO of a startup that pioneered an immunotherapy device before being buried in lawsuits. "They decimated us with anonymous tips, planted stories, and then swooped in to buy our patents at bargain prices." She recounted an endless stream of regulatory delays, mysterious audits, and even threats against her family. She had walked away broken, vowing never to touch pharmaceuticals again. Each new interview mirrored the trauma. A gifted data analyst described how her research disappeared from cloud accounts overnight. A young founder from California detailed how, after rebuffing unsolicited buyout offers from Sterling Pharma, she awoke to headlines accusing her firm of clinical fraud, a charge eventually dismissed, but not before her reputation and funding collapsed. Emily listened, sometimes recording the calls with their permission, sometimes simply taking notes. Each story became a lifeline, evidence that Biotera's tragedy was merely the latest iteration of a sickness infecting the industry. She knew the burden of trauma, isolation, lost purpose, the itch of paranoia. But as she connected voices from across the country, she realized that, together, their stories could break the silence Sterling and its ilk depended on. Becky Levine, who had become Emily's legal North Star, worked meticulously through the growing mountain of documentation. She applied her sharp mind to contracts, emails, and regulatory notices, hunting for inconsistent language or evidence of internal leaks. At night, she drafted letters to government oversight agencies and sketched arguments for civil conspiracy and fraudulent misrepresentation, quietly consulting with a veteran whistleblower attorney. Anna Kim, growing ever more adept at digital forensics, traced suspicious logins back to servers rented in Eastern Europe, designed to mask their origins, but linked by reused metadata to Sterling's IT infrastructure. The complexity of the sabotage astounded her. Even the keystrokes suggested professionals, not opportunistic hackers. With members of her old university's cybersecurity club, Anna began quietly probing Sterling's public-facing systems for vulnerabilities, always careful to remain on the right side of the law. Priya and Nolan, though not investigators by training, contributed in crucial ways. Priya pored over research papers and patent filings, identifying obscure but pivotal inventions that had recently changed corporate hands under questionable circumstances. Nolan built data models simulating investment activity across biotech IPOs, tidal patterns of funding and withdrawal that eerily matched the pressure campaigns described by their new network of whistleblowers. All the while, Emily and her allies were careful. They encrypted their communications, avoided patterns that could be traced, and swore each recruit to secrecy. Javier reminded them, "You're not just up against bad actors. You're up against an institution that protects itself." His words stayed with Emily, fueling her mixture of anxiety and determination. As the weeks passed, patterns crystallized, connections hardening from mere speculation to actionable intelligence. By mid-March, Emily's team could document not only the timing of the attacks, but also correspondence between shell companies and legal advisors contracted by both Sterling Pharma and several shadowy consulting entities that had abruptly ceased operations after Biotera's downfall. It was then that Javier delivered a breakthrough. He arrived at the Cambridge office one morning with a grim smile, dropping a thick folder on the war room table. Inside were copies of encrypted emails, schedules of off-the-record meetings, and, most damningly, a wiretap transcript obtained from a federal contact still eager to see justice served within the pharmaceutical world. In it, Richard Dawson and an unnamed intermediary discussed putting the squeeze on Biotera, a phrase repeated verbatim in a later text to Michael Reed. The revelation sent a shockwave through the tight-knit team. For Emily, it was both vindication and an unshakable source of rage. Here, finally, was evidence that their fall had not been weakness or chance, but deliberate, coordinated sabotage. But even with hard proof, Emily faced a daunting question. How could she use it? Her options were fraught with risk. Go public too soon, and Sterling's lawyers might discredit the evidence. Or worse, force her into an expensive legal battle that could drag on for years. Wait too long, and someone within the system might discover their probe, or silence their whistleblowers before the full story emerged. As she weighed her next moves, Emily returned to the foundation that had reanimated her: community and courage. She began organizing confidential group calls, bringing together the CEOs, scientists, and technologists who had suffered at the hands of Sterling and similar predators. On the first call, more than a dozen joined, each bringing new names, old wounds, and tacit promises to stand beside Emily when the fight went public. "We're not victims anymore," Emily said at the close of the meeting, her voice clearer than it had been in months. "We're witnesses, and together, we're the evidence the world can't ignore." That week, Laura Tran, the hard-hitting journalist, returned with a team of documentarians, ready to begin filming interviews and gathering source material for a bombshell report. Emily helped coordinate the safe exchange of information, guarding anonymity wherever necessary. Thus, the chapter closed with Emily, battle-weary but newly ignited, standing at the epicenter of a gathering force. The secrets she and her allies uncovered were no longer just shadows. They were the beginnings of a reckoning, one destined to shake the industry to its core. Turning the tables, the evidence Emily Carter's team had gathered was a fuse waiting to be lit. Yet the plan to expose Richard Dawson and upend the shadowy grip Sterling Pharma held over the industry was not just about evidence. It was a high-stakes game of timing, strategy, and nerves of steel. Each day, Emily awoke weighed down by dread and trembling with anticipation. Her little war room in Cambridge hummed with preparation. Whiteboards scrawled with flowcharts, timelines connecting events and names, encrypted laptops flashing as Anna, Javier, Becky, and the team refined their battle plan. The decision to strike came down to a single event, the annual Pharma America Conference, the most high-profile gathering in the industry. All the major power players, corporate giants, regulatory officials, researchers, press, would be there, eyeing each other as rivals and allies in the same breath. This year, Sterling Pharma was set to unveil a much-hyped breakthrough in cancer treatment, largely believed to be based on innovations stolen from Biotera. For Emily, it was the perfect stage, but taking the fight public would put an irreparable target on her back. Emily's people grew tense as the week of the conference approached. Anna double-checked their cybersecurity protocols daily, running penetration tests and updating encryption keys. Becky finalized affidavits, testimony, and copies of wire transfers and emails. Hard, undeniable evidence ready for regulators, journalists, and the FBI. Javier worked his contacts and confirmed that once their presentation went live, an official inquiry into Sterling's operations would begin. They kept every move secret, communicating only on secure platforms and in face-to-face meetings when possible. But still, Emily couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. 3 days before the conference, Javier called her late at night. "You've got people tailing your apartment," he warned, voice grave. "Sterling's sniffing. Don't take chances. Go anywhere. Take someone with you." Instead of fear, the warning steeled Emily's resolve. Nothing, no intimidation, no whispered threats, would stop her now. The night before the conference, her team met in a cramped hotel room, blocks from the convention center. Emily stood at the window, gazing down at the city's river of lights, feeling the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Tomorrow's not about revenge," she told them quietly. "It's about truth. If we let them keep the narrative, this will happen again to someone else, not just us." Dawn broke gray and cold. The conference center was a fortress of glass and steel, humming with anticipation as thousands of attendees mingled, networked, and speculated about market-shifting announcements. Emily moved through the crowd, flanked by Becky and Anna, her nerves masked by a suit pressed the night before and an unwavering gaze. Her presence drew stares and whispers. Emily Carter, the pariah, the cautionary tale, the one some called the industry's naive dreamer, now arriving not as a guest, but as a disruptive force. She felt their eyes on her, derision from her enemies, pity from old colleagues, curiosity from the press. Somewhere across the marble lobby, Richard Dawson was already holding court, surrounded by supporters, unaware that the ground was about to shift beneath his feet.
Please.
They waited until the moment of maximum attention. The keynote panel, live-streamed to a global audience. The hall was crowded, the stage packed with CEOs, scientists, and policy heads. Emily had submitted, through official channels, a request for a brief statement as a stakeholder affected by patent and regulatory trends. The organizers, after much wrangling and perhaps curious about the drama to unfold, had granted her 5 minutes. As she made her way to the stage, a Sterling Pharma staffer intercepted her, hand tight on her arm. "Ms. Carter, I'm sorry, but your credentials are being reviewed. There's been a complaint." Emily's footsteps on the stage sounded impossibly loud. Microphones clicked on. The hush was complete. Attention built on scandal and expectation. She stood, centered herself, and began. "At Biotera, we set out to save lives, not to play games with them. What happened to this company, and to many like it, is not bad luck or poor leadership. It's systematic sabotage. engineered by those who fear true innovation. She began laying out the timeline. Clinical partnerships sabotaged, regulatory decisions influenced, internal data leaks, and displayed, on the enormous screens, unredacted emails and wire transfers linking Michael Reed and Sterling Pharma to a web of attacks on Biotera and at least 4 other startups. Journalists in the audience scrambled for notes. Gasps rippled across the hall. As she scrolled through damning correspondence, legal affidavits, technical audits, and whistleblower testimony, the mood shifted from skepticism to shock. Richard Dawson, seated near the front, tried to interject. "This is a disgraced founder's fantasy." Emily cut him off, firm and steady. "Your denials ring hollow, Mr. Dawson. Here's the transcript of your conversation with Michael Reed. Put the squeeze on Biotera. We'll have what we want by Q3. She stared him down. "This is not about one company. It's about the soul of our industry." The panel moderator stepped in as chaos threatened to erupt. Reporters shouting questions, executives whispering urgently into headsets. Emily handed hard drives and printed folders to the chair of the regulatory committee and to the FBI liaison present in the crowd. Becky stood by her, holding up signatures and statements from other aggrieved founders. Anna synchronized their disclosure online, releasing files to trusted journalists and posting a detailed summary on Biotera's old website, triggering a viral cascade across biotech forums and social media. Within an hour, conference news feeds lit up. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Some in the industry tried to rally around Sterling Pharma, but the sheer volume and clarity of evidence overwhelmed even their allies. Regulators announced an official investigation on the spot. Stock prices for Sterling and several affiliates began to plummet. Journalists circled Emily and her team, pushing microphones and cameras forward, desperate for interviews. Emily faced the onslaught with surprising calm, feeling not pride, but a bone-deep relief. For the first time since Biotera had been targeted, she was no longer powerless. Her story, and the stories of so many like her, had burst into the open. That evening, as the conference spun into chaos, her team huddled in the hotel room, phones buzzing with support from whistleblowers and tech allies nationwide. Anna wept quietly with relief. Becky poured cheap wine into paper cups. Emily stood apart at the window, grateful for her friends, her team, and most of all, for the fire inside her that had refused to burn out. Biotera might still lay in ruins, but now so did the myth of untouchable corporate power. Tomorrow would bring legal battles and fresh dangers, but tonight, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of victory. The tables had turned, not just for her, but for every honest innovator waiting for justice. The decisive conference. The week following Emily Carter's explosive exposé at the Pharma America conference was a whirlwind of media storms, legal maneuvering, and industry upheaval. But for Emily and her resilient team, the real battle was just beginning. The conference had revealed not only the rot at the center of Sterling Pharma, but also the lengths Emily's adversaries would go to protect their power. Now, the world was watching, and the next step would either cement her vindication or leave her in the ruins of public opinion. As the industry reeled, rumors flew fast. Sterling Pharma's executives retreated into damage control, issuing hasty denials and threatening countersuits. Allies of Richard Dawson launched their own PR offensive, framing Emily's revelations as a calculated smear from a failed entrepreneur. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and the emails, recordings, and financial records Emily's team had assembled stood up under media scrutiny. Financial news outlets ran with the narrative. Yet, as the next major industry event loomed, a high-stakes regulatory and business summit nicknamed the Decision Conference, Emily knew the real reckoning would unfold not through headlines, but in boardrooms and hearing halls. The conference, scheduled annually as a venue to set partnership policy and public health priorities, had never before been so charged. This year, it would determine not just the future of Sterling Pharma, but the fate of every small innovator in the industry. Days before the conference, tension at Emily's small Cambridge office ran high. Regulatory agencies had formally summoned Richard Dawson, his legal team, and several implicated Sterling board members to testify in a closed-door panel. Emily, too, was called, her presence a signal that once dismissed voices now demanded to be heard. Her team pored over every detail, reviewing their chain of documentation, prepping Emily for expected pushback, rehearsing her testimony and statements until she could answer possible questions in her sleep. "You're not just defending yourself," Becky reminded her the night before they left for the summit. "You're setting a precedent for every startup that's ever been trampled by giants." The venue glimmered with false tranquility as attendees filed into its sleek marble halls. Security was thick, and whisper networks buzzed with speculation. Would the regulators act decisively? How much would Sterling's empire unravel? Could Emily's story stand the strain of private interrogation and public spectacle? Behind the scenes, legal teams circled like sharks. Richard Dawson arrived flanked by lawyers in sharp suits and PR advisors glued to their phones. He looked neither humbled nor intimidated, but the crack beneath his bravado was visible to those who knew how to look. Shares of Sterling Pharma had plummeted in the past week. Institutional partners had started to distance themselves, and senior scientists were rumored to be jumping ship.
What did he do?
Yet, Richard still moved like a man convinced of his invincibility. Emily, by contrast, arrived in steady determination, flanked silently by Anna, Becky, and Javier. None were naive about what was at stake, and all bore the marks of sleepless nights. But their unity was palpable as they checked their credentials and entered the bustling conference center. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears, but she kept her face set. The summit opened with a perfunctory review of the year's scientific advances and industry trends. Buzzwords were tossed around: innovation, integrity, patient outcomes. Yet rarely had these terms meant less than in the current climate. Then, the real event began, a plenary session, crowded with journalists and observers, in which Emily was scheduled to make her case directly before regulators, industry executives, and the press. A thick silence fell as she was introduced. Standing at the lectern, Emily reviewed the room, a sea of skeptical, curious, and anxious faces. She spoke clearly, refusing to let nerves dictate her pace. She laid out Biotera's story, the pattern of intimidation, manipulation, and theft traced through forensic documents and testimony. She called out not just Sterling Pharma, but the broader culture that had allowed such practices to fester. Her words were precise, her anger unwavering but controlled. She anticipated Richard Dawson's tactics, the mock indignation, the attempts to paint her as an unstable malcontent. When his team tried to undermine her, questioning her motives, suggesting her company had always been doomed, Emily answered each accusation with irony-tinged clarity and damning evidence. She refused to take the bait when his lawyers tried to sidetrack the discussion into personal attacks. "I built Biotera from scratch," Emily said quietly into the microphone. "What I couldn't have built were the obstacles thrown at us by those with more money, power, and willingness to destroy competitors At any cost. This isn't only my story. It's the story of everyone in this room who has tried to do the right thing in the face of systemic corruption. The day stretched on, punctuated by tense cross-examinations and closed-door strategy sessions. Anna presented technical audit summaries that showed data exfiltration and network sabotage mapped to Sterling Pharma's contractors. Javier explained, in clear lay language, how wire transfers linked Sterling to shell companies, used in regulatory lobbying and media manipulation. Becky submitted legal exhibits and statements from other founders, corroborating Emily's narrative with a chorus of independent voices. As evidence piled up, the mood shifted tangibly. Industry veterans began to mutter in support. Several regulators, previously cautious, raised pointed questions to Dawson's team. By the second day, rumors swirled that congressional health committees had convened emergency inquiries into pharmaceutical oversight. But the most telling change came when other small company founders, emboldened by Emily's example, stepped forward. A shy immunologist stood up to describe eerily similar sabotage tactics leveled at her diagnostics startup. A venture capitalist confessed he'd been pressured to withdraw from promising firms after untraceable threats. Each story reinforced the pattern Emily had revealed, that the industry's innovation had been stifled not by lack of talent, but by well-financed predation. Richard Dawson's legendary composure finally cracked. Caught between mounting evidence and a tide of testimonies, he alternated between sputtering denial and open contempt. The press captured every moment, and social channels trended with hashtags like Doc Pharma Reckoning and Justice for Biotera. The final panel saw regulators announce the launch of a formal criminal investigation into Sterling Pharma's senior leadership and operations. Civil suits launched by affected companies began to consolidate, with Emily and Biotera listed as lead plaintiffs. As the conference drew to a close, Emily felt the enormity of what her team had accomplished. Biotera might never return to its former glory, but a new era was beginning. One where wrongdoing was met with resistance, where solidarity could bloom even in an adversarial field. The journey wasn't over. There would be courtrooms, depositions, more attempts at intimidation, and smear campaigns. But as Emily left the conference, passing through a gauntlet of reporters and back into the cold autumn air, she felt lighter than she had in months. The decisive conference had not simply revealed the truth, it had redefined the landscape. For the first time, hope seemed not only possible, but inevitable. Consequences and justice. In the weeks after the decision conference, the ripples of Biotera's reckoning surged outward, transforming the once stagnant world of biotech startups and pharmaceutical titans alike. For Emily Carter, the fight was not yet over, but this time, the world was finally paying attention. Lawsuits sprouted in courtrooms across Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C. Headlines tracked every twist, and the financial markets danced to the tune of truth, finally unearthed. The most immediate blow fell on Sterling Pharma and its CEO, Richard Dawson. Federal investigations moved rapidly, drawing on evidence provided by Emily's team and supplemented by fresh testimony from whistleblowers, emboldened by Biotera's example. Within days, government agents raided Sterling's headquarters. News cameras captured the image of Richard Dawson being escorted out of the marble-floored lobby while a crush of journalists shouted for comment. It was a far cry from the boardrooms and private jets he had grown accustomed to. Now, the symbols of his power had become cages of scrutiny. Sterling's fall was unprecedented. The company's board, desperate to contain the fallout, issued public apologies, and severed Dawson's contract. Internal emails and court documents soon revealed how deep the rot had gone. Years of coordinated market manipulation, silencing of researchers, and quiet acquisition of patents through intimidation. The FDA, under pressure from both Congress and the public, suspended several of Sterling's upcoming drug applications, launching reviews of every product that had passed through their hands over the past decade. For Michael Reed, the reckoning was more personal. Once lauded as Emily's partner in the operational brain of Biotera, he spent long hours in closed-door depositions, answering for his role in leaking proprietary data and sabotaging the company he had helped build. Emily's testimony was somber, never triumphant. When their eyes met across a courtroom for the first time, she saw not the friend she had trusted for years, but a man hollowed by consequences. In media interviews and behind-the-scenes legal negotiations, Emily made it clear forgiveness was different from forgetting, and justice demanded both accountability and transparency. As the months unfolded, more revelations surfaced. It became clear that Sterling had not acted alone. Other large companies and consulting firms had contributed to a culture of fear, secrecy, and calculated destruction of competitors. Emily's team worked closely with regulators, sharing their findings and developing educational materials for industry watchdogs. The press dubbed it the Biotera effect, a newfound caution among venture investors and a wave of whistleblower initiatives launched throughout the sector. But justice was not measured only in prison sentences and public shaming. Across the industry, small firms and ambitious founders realized they had options beyond silence or surrender. Advocacy groups formed partnerships with legal experts and policymakers, pushing for reform in patent law, transparent peer review, and meaningful protections for startup intellectual property. Emily found herself testifying before congressional committees, her story shaping amendments to laws she once barely understood. She spoke not just for Biotera, but for the countless companies whose names would never trend, whose innovations had vanished under the weight of corruption. Within Biotera's old offices, now emptied of proprietary equipment, but alive with the energy of investigation, Emily and her team kept moving. Anna Kim was tapped for a national digital security task force, her tracing of Sterling's online sabotage techniques shaping best practices across biotech. Becky took a paid fellowship with a nonprofit legal clinic, guiding other whistleblowers through their own daunting disclosures. Nolan and Priya built new careers, their reputations burnished, not blemished, by the war they had waged for the truth. Not everyone claimed easy victories. Some former Biotera employees faced skepticism as they searched for new positions. A few, traumatized by the months of siege, left the industry altogether. Emily mourned their losses. When she was invited to speak at medical schools and innovation summits, she told their stories along with her own. In every crisis, she said, there are those whose courage is quiet and who go unrecognized. They are just as vital as those of us in the spotlight. Justice, too, was deeply personal for Emily. She spent more time with her parents, reconnecting over slow dinners and walks along the Charles River. Her father apologized for ever doubting her, her mother for trying to shield her from pain that, in the end, made her stronger. Old friends reached out, and, slowly, Emily learned to accept gratitude without guilt and to forgive herself for the things she could not control. The legal process was painstaking and slow, but in time, concrete results emerged. Richard Dawson and several Sterling executives pleaded guilty to fraud, market manipulation, and conspiracy. Michael Reed, facing a lighter sentence due to cooperation, was barred from serving in any corporate leadership role. Restitution funds were created for companies and individuals whose lives had been upended by the orchestrated sabotage. Other companies, previously targeted by Sterling's tactics, regained control of their patents or won settlements that provided a lifeline. Regulators overhauled their review processes, installing independent auditors and launching quick response teams for reports of sabotage or data tampering. Emily's own vindication came quietly. One morning, as she opened her laptop to find dozens of congratulatory emails from patients who had dreamed of Biotera's innovations, from young scientists who now saw a path forward, and from colleagues at rival firms who thanked her for making it possible to hope again. Yet, Emily knew justice was not a finish line, but a foundation. The cost of her fight, lost years, lost friendships, scars both public and private, would never entirely fade. But in place of bitterness, she cultivated resolve. She encouraged her team, now scattered to new frontiers, to nurture the lessons they'd learned. Integrity is not a business model. It's the only model worth building a career on. As autumn settled over Boston, Emily Carter felt a sense of wholeness she had once thought impossible. The courts and Congress would keep sparring. Market trends would rise and fall. But in coffee shops, classrooms, and conference halls, a new kind of conversation was taking hold, one that valued transparency and collaboration over secrecy and sabotage. For the first time, Biotera's legacy was not one of ruin, but of reckoning and renewal, new beginnings. Autumn in Boston had a clarity that Emily Carter had missed during the chaos of her previous years. The air, sharp and clean, seemed to offer possibilities rather than warnings. As the leaves turned brilliant gold and crimson, Emily felt the urge to start again, not out of stubbornness or the need to prove herself, but because rebuilding, she realized, was the only way to truly honor what Biotera had once stood for. Biotera itself was gone, its logo taken down, its intellectual property scattered among settlements, its headquarters now the temporary home to a nonprofit cancer research effort started by former employees. Yet, in the aftermath of lawsuits, congressional hearings, and industry reckonings, Emily hadn't retreated or disappeared. She'd spent months meeting with survivors of similar industry battles, with patient advocates, with frustrated young researchers who had gone into science, wanting to make a difference, but had instead encountered bureaucracy and cynicism. She knew now that her next mission had to be different. It couldn't be about a single startup or a single product. It had to be about changing the rules, about making innovation sustainable, ethical, and above all, humane. Emily began quietly, renting a small office in an old brick building near Harvard Square. Unlike Biotera's glass cube high-rise, her new headquarters, she jokingly called it the squirrel's nest, was low-key. Battered bookshelves lined with case files, mismatched chairs, a whiteboard crowded with mission statements and diagrams. She was, once again, starting almost from scratch. But this time, she welcomed simplicity. Flashy VC pitches and networking galas were replaced with early morning breakfasts, with policy leaders, video calls with activists, and one-on-one coffees with scientists eager to leave toxic workplaces. Her new organization, tentatively named Lumina Initiative, wasn't designed to be a pharmaceutical company. Instead, it was a hybrid, part advocacy group, part incubator, part watchdog. Its mission was to nurture science that put patients first, to expose and block the kinds of anti-competitive abuse that had destroyed Biotera, and to create a public platform where honest researchers and small innovators could connect directly with investors, regulators, and the patients they hoped to serve. Anna Kim returned, drawn by the clarity of purpose she'd found in the heat of the Biotera crisis. Becky Levine rejoined, this time as the lead on policy and legal strategy, negotiating alliances with government ethics offices and global health organizations. Priya Desai and Nolan Cruz signed on in consulting roles. Both were engaged in startups of their own, but offered their expertise in optimism, reinforcing the collaborative spirit that already defined Lumina. Emily called their first staff meeting on an October afternoon. The agenda was simple: dream big, but build lean. "We're not here to be another Goliath," she said, looking around at a team that felt more like family. "We're here to show that you can run a science organization with your soul intact." They brainstormed their initial projects: a whistleblower support network for academic and industry scientists, a fair patent clearinghouse to ensure startups kept the rights to their inventions, an open-source platform for clinical researchers to collaborate without fear of corporate sabotage. Anna suggested developing open-access cybersecurity tools for small labs. "No one should lose years of research to a night shift hacker," she said, her eyes fierce. Becky proposed a series of public workshops aimed at empowering patients to ask questions about their medications and to demand transparency in their own care. Funding wasn't easy, but Emily had learned the power of her story. Grants from health advocacy groups, donations from grateful former Biotera patients. "Your work gave my daughter a shot at life. Please keep fighting," wrote one. And even several small investments from venture funds eager to rehabilitate their own reputations combined to give Lumina a starting budget. "We never want to owe anyone more than our values," Emily cautioned, turning down 2 offers from private investors who demanded board seats in exchange for capital. Mission first, always. Success, she realized, wouldn't be as visible as glossy magazine covers or splashy product launches. Instead, victories came in the form of small but powerful moments. An anxious postdoc facing retaliation at her university for raising concerns about clinical trial data, got legal support, and ultimately saw her research validated. A rural clinic in Kansas, previously ignored by Big Pharma, received funding and technical help to participate in a decentralized cancer drug trial, resulting in several early-stage patients gaining access to cutting-edge therapies that had seemed out of reach. The media watched, at first skeptically, then with growing respect. An investigative editorial in a well-known scientific journal praised Lumina's toolkit for fighting IP theft and called for similar watchdogs in every sector of biotech. Another report highlighted how Lumina's open-source initiative reduced barriers to entry for women and minority-owned research firms. When Emily was invited to speak at a United Nations roundtable on ethical innovation, she found herself addressing policymakers from around the world, urging them to back regulatory standards that put public health above profits. There were setbacks, of course. A partnership with a prominent cancer foundation dissolved when the foundation's board balked at transparency requirements. Lobbyists tried to paint Lumina as anti-business, and online trolls resurfaced, accusing Emily of seeking revenge rather than renewal. Emily's approach, though, focused on persistence, humility, and coalition building. Each setback was another lesson. "We get up every time," she'd remind her team. "That's our legacy." Amid success and struggle, Emily found her own life slowly healing. She reconnected with estranged colleagues and finally allowed herself time off. Walks along the river, weekends visiting her parents, coffee dates with an old friend who quietly became something more. There were moments of grief. Late at night, looking through photos of the early days of Biotera, she sometimes mourned what might have been, but she no longer carried the weight of regret. Instead, she focused on gratitude for what remained and hope for what could be built. As winter's first snow fell on Cambridge, and the city's lights glimmered in the early darkness, Emily stood by her office window with Becky, Anna, and the new staff of Lumina. They watched the snow settling on window ledges and car hoods, quieting the hectic city. The hush felt like a promise. New beginnings aren't about erasing loss, Emily said quietly, her voice steady, but about carrying your lessons forward. I don't know where we'll be in 5 years, or even 5 months, but I believe, finally, that we can make this industry and this world a little better than we found it. The others nodded, and for the first time since Biotera's fall, Emily allowed herself a smile, unburdened by fear. Together, she and her team at Lumina stepped forward into the future, grounded not in ambition alone, but in hope, integrity, and a faith that real change was possible.